All right, guys, we're here with Caitlin Long. Super excited about this conversation. Thank you so much for coming.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you. It's nice to finally meet you.
Absolutely. Let's just go through your background, but I don't want you to kind of gloss over anything. I want you to actually go through every step of it so we can really get into kind of the Wall Street aspect and then how you got into crypto.
Been in crypto since probably 2013. I discovered it in 2012. Didn't actually get my first Bitcoins until 2013. Had to keep my head down. So, and the reason is because I was on Wall Street at that time. I was running a business at Morgan Stanley, and spent 22 years in total on Wall Street from '94 through 2016. Have a legal background, although I've never practiced law. I've been a member of the bar since way back when, and then. Prior to that, grew up in Wyoming, which is going to be relevant, I think, when we talk about the Wyoming blockchain bills. Yeah.
So when you get to Wall Street, what was kind of your first job, and then walk me through the different parts of the business on Wall Street? I
worked in investment banking at Salomon Brothers, doing financial institutions. So just landed there by luck, not a particular interest. It's just that's where I got assigned.
Absolutely.
And found financial institutions incredibly interesting. So did a lot of work in bank mergers and insurance company mergers, and I ended up kind of steering over towards insurance. I find that a fascinating industry, and all of the 22 years had something to do with insurance that I worked on Wall Street.
Why is that so interesting?
Well, it's the law of large numbers. It's actually a really math-based industry. So and part of the reason I didn't practice law is I discovered I was better at math than words, to put it simply. And so the math has always interested me. And I don't have certainly a high-level math background like a cryptographer would, but I knew enough to know, and ended up running a couple of insurance companies within Wall Street firms during those years.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, and so walk me through. You're on Wall Street. At that point you'd been there almost 20 years, right? And what's the first time somebody tells you about Bitcoin, or you kind of stumble across it, and what was your reaction?
Yeah, it was the libertarian community. It was Free State Group. I discovered Austrian economics out of curiosity during the 2008 financial crisis. I figured out that the mainstream explanation of the financial crisis just didn't make sense. And it was a contradiction that Tim Geithner made on Charlie Rose's show, where he talked about how interest rates were too low going into the crisis. And he had just been arguing that interest rates needed to be lowered still. And so obviously I just thought it was illogical and dug. And at the time, stayed in touch with a lot of hedge fund friends. They were all trying to figure everything out. They had found Austrian economics before the financial crisis in a lot of cases, but they dug in, and they even pointed me to the Garrison PowerPoints. That's an obscure Austrian reference that a lot of folks probably a lot of your listeners will understand. But if you haven't seen those, they are incredible.
Absolutely. And so as you're kind of going into that rabbit hole and you're discovering all this stuff, you hear about Bitcoin. What's kind of that first reaction?
Oh, I didn't believe it. And it was also, in those days, there was no UI. And so it was, I'm not a technologist by background, and I was intimidated by it and just scratched my head and couldn't believe it, like a lot of people. And you start reading, and the reason I remember it was February 2013 when I first started to set up a wallet is Jeffrey Tucker sent an email around. And in fact, a few months ago, I actually saved that email, and I had sent it back to Jeffrey a few months ago to remind him of when's the first time he started writing about Bitcoin. It was in an email on Laissez-Faire Books. And I happened to be flat on my back after having had a surgery for a couple of days, so I had time to really dig into it. It takes time, and it takes a lot of repetition. And Jeffrey had some how-to advice in that email. It was never published on a website, although when I sent it back to him a couple of months ago, he published it just so he could kind of have a record of it. Yeah.
And so where'd you go to buy Bitcoin, right? So this is 2013. It's pretty early. There's not really that many places where, one, people are talking about this stuff, and then two, kind of what I would consider a really great user experience or a user interface. So without the technology background, what do you do?
Yeah, that was the there was an ATM up at Liberty Forum.
Amazing.
And so that wasn't actually my very first Bitcoin came from the blockchain.info guys. They were up at Liberty Forum explaining, and they hosted a how-to, and it was very well attended by a lot of curious people. And set up another wallet through them, and then they sent us fraction, a few Satoshis. And then I went out and put $20 into a Bitcoin ATM. Yeah.
That is an amazing story.
Yeah.
All right. So we go from 2013 to over the next 2-3 years, kind of what is your relationship with Bitcoin, crypto? I'm assuming you go deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, get more excited about it.
Yeah.
Still on Wall Street?
Still on Wall Street, and a very good friend of mine, Ari Levy-Cohen, who's one of the co-founders of Singular DTV. He was also at Morgan Stanley at the time, and he had gone down the rabbit hole, and more so than I, and more technologically savvy than I was, and so was already digging. He was already running a full node, I think, at that point, and so he was really helpful to me in understanding it. And there was another, the third of the three Morgan Stanley Musketeers, Jake Dienelt, who you probably crossed paths with. Unfortunately, he passed away, as you know. But the three of us came from very different parts of Morgan Stanley, and we connected with each other over Bitcoin. I'd known Ari previously, but we really got to know each other more closely over Bitcoin. It's
like the secret society of crypto on Wall Street.
Well, and there was an internal Morgan Stanley Bitcoin email list, a forum that got going. And what was fun about it is when I joined it, there were already probably, 50 people on it, and it grew to hundreds of people.
And this is like 2014, 2015?
Yeah, 2014. And, everybody was afraid, right, of the compliance department. No one knew what the implications for being involved with this would be. And so in the beginning, I just lurked, and I noticed that most of the people were younger, and i.e. more junior, but they were all from all over the place. It wasn't just the technology department, and it wasn't just the United States. It was literally all over the world, a very diverse cross-section of people who were interested in this, and it really blossomed. And as it blossomed, I started to participate, and then I got a phone call from the chief technology officer, because I was a managing director running a business, and so I had a little gray hair, so to speak, and he said, "Come on into my office and tell me what this is." And the board had, it turned out, just asked him at the time. I think this was 2014 to make sure that he understood what this was and didn't miss it, because the hype was starting to form already by that time. And I had already been in several meetings. The first blockchain company that I met at Morgan Stanley was Ripple. They came in through a friend, and he pulled me in not knowing I knew anything about Bitcoin. And I remember about 5 minutes into the meeting, putting my pen down and saying, "Oh my God, this is going to tip." And all the Morgan Stanley people, that we were arrayed across the table, from Chris Larson and Patrick Griffith and the whole Ripple team at the time. There were probably 5 of them and then 5 of us. And the Morgan Stanley people looked at me like I was just from Mars. They were like, "What the heck?" Because they didn't know anything about what was what the Ripple folks were saying. And I just remember Chris Larson, the look on his face, he relaxed, because he knew he wasn't fighting an uphill battle to educate everybody on the other side of the table. And it was just like the smile that came across his face when he
found a champion.
Yeah.